We talked about service principals and app registrations in the last module to see how authentication works for applications. But now we need to look at how we grant access from one Azure resource to another. You don't want your database to have anonymous access, so you require applications to authenticate to it in order to reach the data. So if your application needed to access that database, you give it the necessary account information to do so. Managed identities provide us with a way to authenticate between resources within our own tenant. We create managed identities on a trusted resource, and then on the trusting resource, we assign the necessary permissions in order to access the information. Going back to our example, the trusted resource would be the application. The trusting resource would be the database, and we make sure that the trusted resource or the application has the right permissions to view the information within that database that they need to. An advantage of using managed identities is that there's no credentials to manage or to worry about. You don't have to worry about passwords expiring and password rotations. Additionally, since there's no passwords to share, the likelihood of that identity becoming compromised is almost non-existent. There are two types of managed identities. The first is system assigned. These are created and assigned directly on the resource. User assigned are created independently of the resource and then assigned to one or more resources. Thinking back to the example we just talked about, managed identities are essentially a special service principal that is used within Azure AD specifically and only for authenticating two or more Azure resources. Authorization is still a separate task from creating the managed identity. You'll still need to go into the trusting resource and define what permissions the trusted resource or managed identity can provide. You can see in this example we have a trusted resource on the left, which is a virtual machine. We have a managed identity in the middle and a key vault that's on the right. We have associated that VM with the managed identity. We have also authorized the managed identity to have certain permissions on the key vault. By completing both of these actions, the virtual machine is now able to talk to the key vault and, depending on how the authorization was configured, can access whatever resources were provided to it. As we mentioned, there are two types of managed identities. We've got system assigned and user assigned. With system assigned identities, it is created on the trusted resource. You don't need to do anything else outside of enabling the managed identity on the trusted resource. You still need to go through and provide authorization, but the authentication or assignment part is handled automatically. With user assigned, it has to be manually created. Once you create that managed identity, then you also need to go through and associate with the resource. So there's two steps with the user assigned versus the one with the system assigned. Once you have a system assigned identity, it will remain in place until that resource is destroyed. So it's very low maintenance. So you don't have to go in and think about it once it's created, because again, it is tied to that one resource. A user assigned identity doesn't have any expiration date or any sort of built-in mechanism to remove it after it's created. It is again user managed, so you need to ensure you keep track of them and remove them after they are no longer needed. A disadvantage to a system assigned identity is that it's a one-to-one mapping between the identity and the resource. You can't create an identity on one VM and then go through and associate that same identity on a separate VM. With user assigned identities though, you can create one identity and associate it with multiple resources, so you can have that one step that's done and then it can be shared with multiple resources. The use case for each of these I think becomes pretty apparent after reviewing the two identity types. System assigned identity is good for a workload that is contained within a single resource, one VM or one web app for example. User assigned identities excel when there's multiple resources associated with the workload, or if you have a resource that is frequently recycled and redeployed, as this allows you to have that identity in place and configured as that new resource comes online. Now that we understand managed identities and system managed versus user managed, let's go into the portal and see how they work. We've got an app service here and we know our long-term plan is to integrate with a key vault. But before we can do that, we need to have a way that it can authenticate and be authorized to access that key vault. So to do that, we're going to create a managed identity. And if we scroll down on the left under settings, we can find the identity option here. And if we select that, you can see we have two options. We can do a system assigned identity or a user assigned identity. We're going to go ahead and leave this on system assigned. So we'll go ahead and click on and save. You can see that yes, it's going to be enabling a managed identity. So we'll let this go through and create, and it'll take a minute or so. And now you can see we've got that system assigned identity ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, and we're not going to assign it any Azure RBAC roles because we're not going to have it create VMs or do anything like that. However, we are going to need it to authenticate with the Key Vault. So to do that, let's go ahead and search for Key Vaults up top. We'll select Key Vaults, and we've got our one Key Vault listed already. So let's go ahead and select that Key Vault. And now we're going to go to access policies. And the access policy is essentially how you define what can access this Key Vault, and additionally what permissions are available to that. So let's go ahead and add an access policy. You've got a couple templates that you're going to select from. We want ours to be as restrictive as possible because we don't want that identity accessing something it shouldn't. So I'm not going to select any of the templates. However, I'm going to go into secret permissions, and I'm going to select Get and List. And this will allow it to view all secrets that are in this Key Vault. Now that we've selected what permissions are there, we need to go through and select which identity or which user can access this. We're going to go select this, and now I'm going to paste that ID that I copied when I created the managed identity. And we can see it also notes to ing-app01. So let's go ahead and select that and hit select and add. And now if we scroll down under the access policy, we can see that the application, so it does recognize that it is an application and not a specific user, has the secret permissions of Get and List. Let's go ahead and save. And that is a process of creating a system managed identity and then assigning permissions to a Key Vault. If we needed to assign permissions so that it had roles or the ability to make changes within Azure, then we would go and assign a Azure RBAC role to that identity. If we go up top now and search for managed identities, you can see it's not showing any here because this is actually only for user managed identities. So let's go ahead and do add here. It's going to ask us what resource group we want it to be in. We'll put it in our Skylines resource group. We'll leave the default of East US region. And let's go ahead and call it user MI for user managed identity. We'll go ahead and review and create. We'll create it. And now we've created that user managed identity. And if we need to go through then and assign permissions to it, if we go to ing-app01, we'll go back down to identity. And if we go to user managed identity, we can go ahead and select a user MI that we just created and save. And essentially this is the process, or that would be the process for creating a user identity, is that we go through, you create it in advance, then you go assign it to your resource, and then from there you would go back and do the exact same steps from this point forward. Whether you're going to assign it to a Key Vault, or if you wanted to assign permissions within Azure, then you would assign an RBAC role. The process from this point forward is the same whether you use a user assigned identity or a system assigned identity.